A 19-year-old college student grabbed a phone on a Friday night in California, May 24th, 1996. She dialed her parents. No answer. Just an answering machine catching her final promise. Good news, good news. Sunday I'll call. Her family clung to that tape forever. Because Sunday vanished. And decades later, no one has a clue what she was so desperate to share. Kristen Smart. Before we get into the nightmare of her disappearance, you absolutely have to grasp this one fundamental truth about her. She lived out loud, totally fearless, moving through spaces like she owned them. Her emails always ended with exactly the same quote. Live as an exclamation, not an explanation. Not just empty words. London at 16. A Venezuelan exchange program. Hawaii right before college started. Ocean breezes, pulling lifeguard duty. 6'1". Solid confidence. The kind that tricks a girl into feeling perfectly safe walking solo. Lock that specific detail in your brain right now. Don't forget it. Because her fierce independence, that wild spark forcing her to chase every single thrill, became a fatal flaw. It put her alone on an empty street at 2 a.m., kicking off a night that shattered absolutely everything. Fall of 1995 brought her to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Off-campus housing absolutely sucked. So by January, she relocated to Muir Hall, room 20, stuck right inside those iconic red bricks, dead center on campus. A total reset. Natural blonde hair, dyed completely dark brown. She even tested out alternate identities. Trixie, Marisol, Roxy. Standard freshman behavior, honestly. Figuring out an identity from scratch in a town where absolutely nobody had boxed her in yet. Except she was drowning. Brutal courses. Untamed ADHD. Waking up at 4:20 sharp for a grueling 5 a.m. lifeguard shift. She phoned home, completely defeated. Sinking fast. She practically begged to quit school. Her mom fired back a massive letter. Endless opportunities await. Dust yourself off. Ride again. So she stayed. Crucial detail. A girl on the brink of quitting, who stays? That's someone secretly hoping things will finally improve. Then, on May 24th, they actually did. Earlier that term, she'd totally blown a massive biology test. But that Friday, a professor offered a makeup exam. For a kid desperately treading water just to survive, that tiny break meant absolutely everything. 5:30 p.m. rolls around. She calls home. Silence. Good news. Good news, the machine recorded. Sunday I'll call. Pure, unfiltered joy radiating from her voice. Time to party. Memorial Day weekend was here. The dorms were a ghost town. Her main lifeline was Margarita Campos, another freshman fighting ADHD, barely surviving a brutally tough first year. Kristen pounded on her door. Let's go. We're finding a party tonight. Margarita was dead on her feet. Zero interest. But Kristen kept pushing, and eventually, her friend totally caved. Huge red flag. Kristen carried zero identification that night. Wallet, gone, cash, plastic, even her personal dorm key, nowhere to be found. Misplaced it days ago. She literally jammed Margarita's room key into her shoe, completely stripped of her identity. First stop? Some pathetic little on-campus hangout. Guys glued to video games on a busted couch. Margarita took one glance. I ditched my books for this crap, so they bailed. Kristen, though, nowhere near finished. She wanted frat row. Margarita was totally over it. She demanded her key back, walked away, and that was it. Kristen watched her leave. Then, she just kept walking. Solo, stubborn, unstoppable. Same old Kristen. Barely a tenth of a mile down the road, she hit the jackpot. Sigma Chi's unofficial house throwing a birthday bash. 60-ish bodies, heavy bass shaking the walls, red solos everywhere. She walked right in, alone. I'm Roxy, totally working the room, laughing, grabbing a guy named Trevor aside to whisper about some basketball players she liked across the room. Genuinely enjoying herself tonight. But pay close attention to this. Cops obsess over this exact detail later. Witnesses swore they almost never saw a cup in her hand. Not a party animal. She'd fake sips just to blend in with the crowd. Almost everyone agrees she drank practically nothing. So here's the catch. Host Tim Davis steps outside at 2 a.m. to kick stragglers out. He finds Kristen sprawled across a neighbor's yard, passed out, freezing, couldn't stand, barely even conscious of her surroundings. Something felt deeply, terribly wrong. A lightweight girl, barely sipping alcohol, completely blacked out before the bash officially wrapped up. Tim dragged her up. A girl named Cheryl Anderson volunteered to escort them back to campus. 3 kids navigating pitch-black streets toward the dorms, and then a shadow quietly slipped up from behind. "I'm Paul Flores," claimed his route was exactly the same as theirs. He just slid forward, wrapped his arm right around Kristen's exposed waist like an old boyfriend, assuring the other 2 he'd handle her. No permission asked. Zero hesitation. He just wormed his way in. An exclamation, not an explanation. That was Kristen's entire identity, her personal mantra. Except that night, a predator had already chosen a much darker ending for her story. The most chilling part of it all? Not a single person at that crowded house party kept an eye on him. Listen closely. Because those next 40 yards altered the course of history. 40 yards. That happens to be the precise gap separating Paul Flores's dorm from the entrance to Kristen's hall. We aren't talking about some massive trek down a pitch-black highway. 40 yards down a perfectly illuminated sidewalk, a stroll taking maybe 30 seconds tops. But she never got there. Now, listen to Paul Flores's official version of events. He claims he escorted Kristen up to his own building, Santa Lucia Hall. He just stood outside, watched her cover those final 40 yards to Muir Hall completely alone, swears he saw her walk through those doors. Then he crashed in his room, a neat, incredibly convenient excuse that absolutely nobody could verify, because Tim Davis had broken off way earlier. Tim hopped in his car and drove himself home, while Cheryl Anderson peeled away, heading toward her own building. He witnessed Paul and Kristen vanishing into the shadows of that walkway. She could barely hold herself up. Paul had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. After that, zero witnesses, no cameras, absolute silence. That very night, Kristen needed to return Margarita's key. She never showed up. When Saturday morning rolled around, her roommate Crystal got back only to spot Kristen's backpack resting exactly where she left it. Her stuff sat untouched. The bed was clearly unslept in. Crystal figured her roommate would wander in eventually. Afternoon dragged by, then evening faded. Come Sunday, that eerie silence became absolutely terrifying. Her friends started frantically making the rounds on campus, asking if anyone had spotted her. Every single reply matched. No. Monday morning rolled around, and they finally contacted campus authorities. "Please, our friend vanished." Those campus cops flat out rejected the report. They brushed it off, claiming Kristen probably just took off for the long holiday weekend. Kids do this constantly, they claimed. And then they dropped a detail so insanely absurd it is genuinely hard to stomach. They seriously suggested she jetted off to Hawaii just because she liked it there. Think about it. A college kid who left behind her luggage, clothes, wallet, identification, cash, and every single bank card somehow randomly bought a weekend flight to the islands. That was literally campus security's official stance. Her friends hit up the local precinct next. Same garbage reaction. Zero hustle, no paperwork, and absolutely no action whatsoever. The clock was ticking fast, and Paul Flores realized precisely the head start he was working with. Meanwhile, over at the Smart household, time dragged on in agonizing suspense. Stan and Denise were waiting on that routine Sunday phone call. It never rang. They figured she just got swamped and forgot. Then campus authorities called, casually checking to see if Kristen was hanging out at home. Denise Smart later recalled feeling that primal maternal dread kick in immediately, knowing deep down something was terribly wrong. She knew how her kid operated. She checked in every single Sunday. The girl absolutely never traveled without giving someone a heads up. This just wasn't her style. Cops tried smoothing things over, insisting she probably just spaced on her weekly check-in. Picture this. They were seriously telling a panicked mother that her kid who abandoned her wallet, identification, and vital prescription pills, along with her school bag, simply spaced out on calling home. A formal missing persons report didn't officially drop until 4 entire days after she vanished. 4 whole days where Paul Flores roamed untouched. 4 days with his dorm room sitting there completely unsealed. 96 hours where literal evidence, bloody clothes, or even an entire mattress could get scrubbed, hauled off, or destroyed while cops looked the other way. Fed up, her dad Stan drove straight to the college. He paced those exact walkways, desperately taping up missing posters himself. Both parents had already swallowed a deeply disturbing truth. If they wanted their little girl found, they were going to have to do the heavy lifting themselves. Look at this one detail from Cheryl Anderson. It honestly never got the spotlight it truly deserved. During that late trek home, right before she split off toward her own building, she caught exactly how Paul was grabbing Kristen, not gently guiding her like some decent guy offering help. His arm was deadlocked around her waist, trapping her tight, forcing her forward, aggressively steering her path. The creepy vibe made her linger much longer than originally intended. Leaving Kristen completely alone with this guy just felt like a terrible mistake. He maintained his grip until she finally hit the front doors of her own residence hall. At that point, she was practically forced to bail. She made Paul swear he'd deliver Kristen safely back to her actual room. He gave his word. Then she stood there, watching them fade into the shadows. That haunting visual lived rent-free in her head for decades. Once detectives finally bothered interviewing the partygoers, literally every single statement pointed to one chilling conclusion. Paul Flores was definitively the final person spotted with Kristen. He was the guy walking her back. Just him and her. Yet insanely enough, detectives didn't formally interview Paul until 6 whole days after she vanished. But here is what makes this entire mess even tougher to stomach. When detectives finally slapped together their very first incident file, look at what they actually zeroed in on. Quote, she didn't really have tight friends at Cal Poly. They noted she seemed noticeably drunk that Friday evening. Pointed out that she was actively chatting up and mingling with multiple different guys at the bash. They claimed she just did her own thing, refusing to fit the mold of a normal teenager. Look, nobody is saying she brought this on herself, not for a second, but mapping out exactly what she did that night, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. You read the initial police reports, and it's almost sickening. Pages analyzing Kristen's personal life, who she hung out with, her habits, her friend group, while completely ignoring the actual guy who walked off into the dark with her. Meanwhile, Paul Flores skated by completely unbothered by cops for 6 whole days. They dragged her reputation through the mud before she was even officially listed as missing. When detectives finally got off their asses and hauled Paul into an interview room, one glaring detail immediately jumped out. Something impossible to miss, 4 days post-party. A shiner. Nasty, dark, and totally impossible to ignore. They pressed him on it. His excuse? Pick up basketball. Except the guys on the court completely blew up that alibi. That was lie number 1. He was hiding something, plain and simple. His own buddies admitted he showed up to the court with his face already bashed in. So the cops push harder, and suddenly, the story flips. Now he claims he smashed his face on a steering wheel at 2 a.m., removing a car stereo. A guy pushing 5'10", miraculously managing to deeply bruise himself on his own dashboard. Oh, and it gets better. Fresh claw marks scraped across the back of his hands, plus severe friction burns completely tearing up his knees. Absolutely zero of it made a lick of sense. Catch him in a bold-faced lie. And what does he do? Just shrugs it off like it's some trivial mix-up. But detectives were finally waking up to a chilling reality. We're not talking about a normal kid who made a single catastrophic mistake. No, this guy had been perfecting his craft for years, blending right into the background, creeping everyone out just enough to raise hairs, but somehow skirting the line, so nobody ever actually stepped in to shut him down. Raised down in Arroyo Grande, California. Look, his folks made an effort, they really did. But back in junior high, he turned on a classmate with such vicious brutality that the poor kid wound up stuck in a hospital bed for weeks. A judge literally ordered him into anger management, and his parents flat out refused, claimed their precious boy was perfectly fine. First instance of the system staring a total sociopath right in the face and just turning a blind eye. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't be the last. Fast forward to high school. 0 friends. I'm talking absolute ghost town. The isolation got so bad his mom and dad actually dropped cash on a pool table, desperately praying it would lure some neighborhood kids over. Crickets. Nobody showed up. He walked across that graduation stage completely alone. Peers weren't just indifferent to the guy, they went out of their way to dodge him. People didn't call him Scary Paul to be funny. It was a literal survival warning whispered down the lockers. And his admission to Cal Poly definitely wasn't academic merit. The guy was bombing his food science classes, pulling a hard D- on his own official transcripts. He coasted in through a loophole, a strict quota prioritizing local kids. literally the only reason he ever stepped foot on that campus. Throw him into a college environment, completely unchecked by hometown oversight, and things went from weird to deeply dangerous. He developed this terrifying three-step method for targeting women. Absolutely zero spontaneity here. Pure predator logic. Step 1. Force your way in. Crashing random house parties every single weekend became his routine. Grabbing a beer with the guys wasn't the goal. He was hunting for the weakest link in the room. Picture this. He'd get trashed alone in his dorm, then prowl the student housing blocks until he spotted a crowd with girls. Which brings us to phase 2, the squeeze. The second he locked onto a target, he didn't bother introducing himself. He'd just slide in uncomfortably close and initiate non-consensual contact right off the bat, gripping a shoulder, snaking an arm around a waist, and if a girl naturally shoved him away, he wouldn't take the hint. He'd literally stalk her to the other side of the room and try it all over again. Several girls from Kristen's party swore they experienced this exact nightmare scenario. Way before this whole tragedy even kicked off, Cheryl Anderson's friend group already had a label for the guy, Chester the Molester. That kind of title isn't earned overnight. It was the result of a sickening routine, getting so notorious that female students practically ran a whisper network to protect themselves. Then came the final, darkest phase. Complete isolation. Let's rewind 5 months before Kristen vanished. December 1995. Dead of night. Paul scales the outside of an apartment complex, literally clinging to a trellis to break onto a girl's private balcony until she spots him. She dials the cops. Officers roll up, order him down, and literally just send him walking. 0 charges filed. No follow-up whatsoever. Turns out, 3 separate girls living in that exact same complex filed complaints about him blowing up their phones, relentlessly stalking them for weeks. Absolutely nothing happened. The textbook definition of a monster operating in broad daylight. Committing crimes right out in the open, while authority figures continuously drop the ball. By that May 24th party, his twisted routine went into absolute overdrive. Crashes the event, per usual. Suddenly, another student, Tim Davis, hears this massive thud, looks over, and there's Paul, physically pinned on top of Kristen on the floor. Later on, another guy, Trevor Bolter, steps out of a spare bedroom where he and Kristen were just chilling out. Guess who's lurking right outside the door? Paul, immediately demanding to know every single detail about what they were doing in there. Then comes the dreadful walk home. Paul keeps aggressively pushing Cheryl to leave them behind, desperate to get rid of the witness. Right as she finally leaves, he actually demands a kiss. Hard pass. He begs for a hug next. She rejects him again. And then, in a moment that would haunt her forever, she watches him lead Kristen straight into the pitch-black night. June 19th. Detectives think they finally have him. 4 weeks after Kristen vanished, he suddenly cuts the interview short. Claims he's busy. Cops have to press him twice before he finally gives them an excuse. His alibi? He supposedly had to go wash away some concrete at his mom's place. The detectives barely blinked. What they completely missed was that Susan, his mother, wasn't living with his dad. She had her own place. Missing that one tiny geographical detail cost them years. Meanwhile, his roommate Derek comes back from a trip. He hears the news about Kristen and drops a half-joking question. What did you do with her? Paul just stares deadpan. She's at my place having lunch with my mom. Derek instantly got a weird feeling about it. He flagged it for the cops, but it got buried in a file. Years later, a police raid on Paul's San Pedro home uncovered absolute nightmare fuel. Sitting right on his desktop, a hidden video folder. At least 10 women. Completely knocked out. Recorded utterly against their will. He was drugging girls, exploiting them completely. And the sickest part? The file name. He literally titled it Practice. This wasn't a mistake. Practice. Meaning he treated this like training. Meaning he'd been getting away with it long enough to consider hunting women an actual skill. They found a massive stash of date rape drugs too. Soon, multiple women who met Paul after Kristen vanished came forward with eerily similar nightmares. A weird-tasting drink. Waking up totally lost. Desperately piecing together the violation they just endured. Kristen wasn't patient zero. The evidence screams that loud and clear. When her family finally slapped him with a civil suit, their only legal trick to drag him into a room, he sat opposite their lawyer and gave them exactly 4 measly words. Just his name. Following that, 27 annoying repetitions of the exact same script. On the advice of counsel, I invoke the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, refusing his parents' names, his address, even if he attended Cal Poly. 27 times. Complete silence. Then, probably feeling the walls closing in, Paul suddenly tries enlisting in the United States Navy. He desperately wanted out of California, trying to vanish from the narrative completely, but her family beat him to the punch, ensuring the military knew exactly who he was. 2014. 18 years after Kristen dropped off the map, Ruben gets a kitchen leak and calls a plumber. Only catch? The fix means crawling beneath the backyard deck. Ruben flat out blocks the guy from going down there, chooses to ignore the leak completely, just lets his kitchen rot. Wouldn't let a repairman poke around for 1 hour. Nearly 2 decades later, whatever was buried under that wood was still fiercely guarded. To get why, you have to look at a colossal mapping screw-up that derailed everything. His folks split back in 1996. His dad Ruben held down his own spot in Arroyo Grande. Susan, the mom, rented a totally separate place over on East Branch Street, maybe a mile away. Cops just assumed they still lived together, so they tore up Ruben's yard but completely ignored the Branch Street property. So think back to that June 19th interrogation, when Paul casually dropped that he needed to dip early to wash off concrete at his mom's place. Not a single detective in the room caught his real meaning. He wasn't talking about Ruben's yard. He meant a totally unsearched separate location. By the time they untangled the addresses, months had vanished. Come August, Susan temporarily moves back with Ruben, tossing the Branch Street pad up for rent. That October, a younger couple named Joe and Mary Leisure move in. Day 1, Susan aggressively points out this aluminum garbage can outside, telling them outright, "Do not touch it. Leave it alone. Someone's coming." 24 hours later, Ruben shows up and hauls it off himself. A completely normal trash can, yet heavily guarded from renters. Crucial enough that Ruben had to make a special trip. Over the next few weeks, weird mail hits the Branch Street address. Nothing for the couple, just envelopes heavily targeting the Flores family. Random people writing stuff like, "You know what he did. Spit it out." Mary ended up hoarding them. Started a whole file, actually. Then, on a random morning while she's washing her car, something catches her eye near the tire. A tiny silver earring. Had this little turquoise stone on the front. But the back? Smeared with a dark, rusty-looking fingerprint. Basically dried blood. And Mary had been staring at Kristen's missing posters plastered all over town. She instantly knew it was a dead ringer. Bagged it up right away. Detectives finally grab it months later. But guess what? Nobody officially logs the damn thing. Tossed straight into some random sheriff's desk drawer and just completely lost. By the time Kristen's family caught wind of this through their lawyer, they stormed into that precinct demanding answers and the evidence. The cops claimed it just vanished. They supposedly did a visual check and decided the earring had absolutely nothing to do with the investigation. Except, they didn't merely misplace some trinket. They managed to lose the single piece of Kristen that had clawed its way back into the light. That jewelry wasn't the single ghost Mary Leisure shared that house with, though. Like clockwork, right before dawn broke over the California coastline, the property would start talking, right around 4:20 in the morning. A muffled beep from the yard would jolt Mary awake. Faint, cold, exactly like a digital watch alarm ringing from 6 feet under. She and her mom would scour the yard in pitch-black darkness, literally crawling the perimeter and pressing their ears against the dirt. Nothing turned up. A few months passed, and the noise finally died. Kristen Smart worked a 5 a.m. lifeguard shift every single day. She would have set her alarm for 4:20 just to make it there. If that watch belonged to her, it sat buried in the dirt, ticking off mornings she'd never see, right until the battery died and left the yard totally quiet. Over at that Branch Street property, Joe Lakater tried planting a garden in this massive wooden box shoved against the rear fence. 3 of the smaller containers flourished perfectly, but the 4th one, measuring 6 feet across, 3 feet wide, just destroyed absolutely any seeds he threw in. He eventually dug down to investigate and hit a solid, impenetrable slab of concrete. The guy next door confirmed those boxes were built back in the summer of 1996. The exact same time frame, Kristen vanished. This neighbor specifically recalled spotting Paul Flores late one night, digging out back with somebody else for roughly 5 straight hours. He stood there watching them drop something into the earth, wrapped tight like a rug, and so incredibly heavy it took 2 guys to lift. Then he saw them bury it. Watched them slather a thick layer of concrete right over the top. They eventually built a garage directly over that grave, totally cutting off backyard access to the driveway. How the Flores family acted in the decades after? Definitely not the vibe of innocent folks with clean hands. Look at the guy who rented from Ruben for 10 years. He told the cops that whenever Ruben brought up Kristen, she was never treated like a missing kid. He spat out insanely toxic, nasty slurs whenever her name came up. No remorse, zero sadness. Just raw, pure hatred for a 19-year-old who had vanished into thin air years ago. Fast forward to 2007, 11 years post-disappearance. Cops finally showed back up at Branch Street carrying ground-penetrating radar. The machines instantly picked up a massive soil anomaly hidden under the yard. Detectives looked at the data and literally decided against digging. Crazy, right? Then, in February 2020, police finally brought actual forensic gear to Ruben's place. They tore up the dirt under his deck and rushed samples out for lab testing. Hours after the cops left, a neighbor caught something wild. Ruben, Susan, and her boyfriend, all 3 out in the pitch black past midnight, having a massive argument. Moving trailers getting backed in and out. Frantic action happening right under that exact same deck police had just combed through earlier. A few weeks passed before the lab results hit. Tests on that dirt pulled from under the porch came back positive for human remains. Technicians also pulled tiny black and white threads from the soil, an exact match for the outfit Kristen had on the night she vanished. The bone expert working the scene uncovered a 4 by 6 foot void directly under the wood framing, pretty much the exact dimensions of a grave. It was totally empty now, but it definitely hadn't been. The dirt practically screamed that someone had been resting there. Someone dug it up. By now, the clues were overwhelming and the story made total sense. Yet somehow, missing a corpse and that smoking gun, the DA flinched. They dragged their feet until one totally normal dude, 0 police training, no press credentials, no real power whatsoever, got completely sick of waiting for justice. Chris Lambert must have driven by her missing poster thousands of times. He grew up just 8 miles outside Cal Poly. That bright smile, the massive cash reward, the tip line, all of it practically served as the backdrop for his whole life. Come 2019, juggling music and consulting for CBS, he finally dug into the files. He didn't stumble on some puzzle. He found cold, hard guilt. Law enforcement had totally dropped the ball. A single suspect. 23 years. 0 handcuffs. He casually joked to his girl, "I bet I could crack this thing." But then a local writer buddy shot him an email that wiped the grin right off his face. Crazy I never mentioned this, but I actually went to high school with the dude who walked her back. Everybody called him Scary Paul. On September 29th, 2019, he released a podcast titled Your Own Backyard. The guy wasn't a cop, no legal authority to demand records. He couldn't force a single human being to sit down for an interview. All he really possessed was a mic and one obsessive question, broadcasted to the world every single week: what the hell really happened to Kristen Smart? 75,000 streams, just in the first 24 hours. It proved exactly what the cops spent 23 years completely missing. Normal folks just don't casually walk into a precinct to rat out a terrifying monster, especially while that guy is still walking the streets. Not when 2 decades of bitter reality proved that turning in Paul Flores achieved absolutely nothing. But here's the catch. They will open up to a guy without a badge. Chris started every single episode with this very specific promise. Basically, the clock ran out on everything except murder. So if you talk now, nobody's going to slap handcuffs on you. That one guarantee? It kicked open doors law enforcement couldn't even budge. Suddenly, witnesses the cops had completely ignored started talking. Women who had terrifying run-ins with Paul in the years following Kristen's disappearance finally started spilling their dark secrets. Neighbors who lived next door to the Flores family. Kids who were actually at that frat party that night. Phone calls, emails, anonymous tips. The justice system wasted 23 years just crossing their fingers, waiting for Paul to slip up. Chris? He just spent a few months tracking down every single person the cops ignored. Like Neil Van Est. He was this Australian exchange student hanging out at Cal Poly on the exact night she vanished. Back in 1996, he actually reported his sighting. The detectives basically brushed him off and buried his statement. For 23 years, his words just collected dust in a box. Here is the nightmare he actually witnessed. Riding his bike home from the library around 2 a.m., he rolls past Sierra Madre Hall Cheryl Anderson's dorm and glances straight through the massive floor-to-ceiling lobby windows. Just two figures inside, a guy and a girl. And the girl? She was desperately fighting to escape. This guy was physically blocking her path. Neil pegged the dude's height at right around 5'10". The girl was noticeably taller, hovering near 6 feet. Paul Flores? 5'10". Kristen Smart was 6'1". Neil literally watched her fighting back. He tried warning them, but for 23 years, nobody gave a damn. Once the podcast dropped, investigators quietly dusted off his file. This time, they actually moved. But the ultimate bombshell, the one that shattered this entire mystery, that came from Jennifer Hudson. She was just 17 in the summer of 1996, literally weeks after Kristen dropped off the map. Hanging out at a local skate park with a crew that included Paul Flores, when suddenly the radio blasted an update about the manhunt for Kristen. Paul slowly turns toward Jennifer, dead calm, almost chillingly casual. He just says, "I was at a party with that girl. I was actually there, and yeah, I did it. Buried her under a skate ramp right at my parents' place." Jennifer just stood there waiting for the punchline, waiting for some sick joke, but the laugh never came. He just stared right through her with these dead, hollow eyes, the exact same eyes she'd later tearfully describe on the witness stand. It was that chilling, psychotic look that practically screamed, "I am telling you this because I know you'll keep your mouth shut." She was 17, and she was terrified. She literally went out and bought a gun, completely paranoid that Paul might silence her. She dragged that horrific secret around for 23 years. A buddy finally mentioned your own backyard. Once she heard Chris guarantee absolute protection for anyone stepping up, she finally picked up the phone. Think about that. A teenager carried a killer's literal confession for over 2 decades. Not from a lack of morals, simply because the corrupt system never proved that talking to them would bring anything but a target on her back. Plus, the podcast was rattling the Flores family, creating a panic that detectives could finally exploit. By 2019, cops scored a wiretap on Paul's phones, using this massive, fresh public pressure. The tapes caught everything. Susan Flores aggressively coaching her son, entirely clueless that the feds were listening to every syllable. "I need you glued to that podcast so we can figure out how to punch holes in it. Though honestly, maybe we can't. You've got to tell me, this wasn't a sad mother. No pleading with her boy to do the right thing. She was literally playing defense attorney, scheming against a podcast. Those tapes verified exactly what detectives always knew. Paul didn't pull this off alone. This sick family spent 23 solid years keeping the lid on this nightmare together. Come April 2020, they raided his San Pedro house and found the tapes. That horrific folder. What was in there? By early 2021, they finally had enough. April 13th, 2021. 25 years after Kristen Smart walked into that dark night. 25 years of ignored voicemails. 25 years since campus security casually suggested she just bailed for Hawaii. That morning, SWAT teams hit 2 different houses at the exact same time. Paul Flores, taken down in San Pedro. Ruben Flores, cuffed in Arroyo Grande. Later that day, Sheriff Ian Parkinson stood before the flashing cameras and admitted something you practically never see in a formal police briefing. He literally credited a podcaster directly. A ton of this intel surfaced because of that podcast most of you already know. The exact same department that lost a bloody earring. The guys who ignored a freshly dug grave. The system that basically gave a murderer permission to just keep his mouth completely shut. The establishment finally had to admit the unthinkable. A podcaster with a cheap mic uncovered what 25 years of official police work completely missed. Nobody popped champagne. It was just a dark, quiet confession showing exactly how horribly the justice system had failed. Putting Paul Flores in handcuffs? Merely the warm-up. The absolute nightmare trial was still looming. October 18th, 2022. Exactly 26 years, 4 months, and 23 agonizing days after Kristen vanished into the night, jurors slowly walked into that Monterey County courtroom. The Smart family sat frozen. Stan, Denise, Matthew, and Lindsay. The exact same people who burned through a quarter century taping up missing posters, fighting a broken system that kept demanding their patience. The clerk finally spoke. Guilty, first-degree murder. Denise instinctively grabbed her daughter Lindsay, holding on tight. Stan just sat dead still. You know that paralyzing look? When a moment you've chased forever actually happens, and your brain just totally forgets how to process it. Hours later, facing a sea of microphones, he uttered the absolute brutal truth. There is zero joy here without Kristen. They even moved the trial from San Luis Obispo straight to Monterey County, roughly 110 miles north. After 26 years, the town was so completely obsessed with the mystery that seating an unbiased jury, basically impossible. Over 1,500 potential jurors got summoned. Court dragged for nearly 3 months. Prosecutors called over 50 witnesses. Paul and Ruben were tried simultaneously. Same room, same judge, but 2 entirely separate juries making their own independent calls. Jennifer Hudson took the stand 26 years after she, then just a terrified 17-year-old, heard a cold-blooded confession she was too scared to report. Crying openly, she recounted his dead eyes, that emotionless tone, the haunting words that tortured her soul for over 2 decades. They pointed out to the jury that during her testimony, she stared straight through Paul Flores whenever she wasn't focusing on her lawyer. Honestly, it felt somewhat vindicating sitting up there staring right into his soulless eyes, forcing him to just sit still and listen in absolute silence. Multiple other victims labeled Jane Does for their own protection also took the stand, exposing exactly what Paul did to them long after Kristen vanished. They talked about being drugged, waking up somewhere totally strange, trying to piece together the horrors committed while unconscious. Prosecutor Christopher Puel addressed this in closing. They became Kristen's voice. They yelled what she couldn't. Absolute heroes. The defense strategy? Frankly pathetic. Paul's lawyer desperately labeled all the forensic evidence complete junk science. He accurately noted the missing body, screaming that prosecutors were just begging jurors to convict on pure speculation. Then things got wild. The defense actually tried pinning Kristen's disappearance on Scott Peterson, the guy who murdered his pregnant wife just because he attended Cal Poly too. The judge shut that circus down instantly. Zero evidence backed it up. This wasn't real legal strategy, just smoke and mirrors. Luckily, the jury saw right through it. October 17th. Ruben's jury surprisingly reached a verdict first, remaining totally sealed until Paul's jury finished up. October 18th. Guilty, first-degree murder. Ruben's verdict followed immediately, not guilty of accessory. The Flores family visibly breathed a sigh of relief. For the Smarts, that second ruling felt entirely different. Yet the dirt right under Ruben's deck definitely held human blood. Fibers matching Kristen's clothes were in that dirt. An expert concluded a body was buried there, then secretly moved. One neighbor even witnessed Ruben, Susan, and her boyfriend suspiciously digging under that deck the exact night police searched it. But the DNA was just too wrecked to secure a match. Thanks to that one tiny scientific blind spot, a guy who barred plumbers from checking under his deck 18 years after she vanished just casually walked free. 26 agonizing years waiting for the whole truth. They walked away with only half. March 10th, 2023. Paul Flores finally stood up for sentencing before Judge Jennifer O'Keefe. Puel called Paul a total psychopath who should never see daylight again. Matthew Smart spoke up next. Paul deliberately took a life, Kristen's beautiful life, and now he has to pay. Then Lindsay Smart finally took the floor. She never even mentioned Paul. She talked about a chair. I stared at my sister's empty seat at home for 26 years. Birthdays, holidays, every single milestone she missed. Meanwhile, Paul got to just live out his totally normal life. And he still hides the only piece I actually care about, where my sister is. Just bringing her home. Not memories her. An empty seat haunting every dinner table for 26 years. That's the brutal toll this nightmare took. It wasn't just losing her. It was the absolute inability to mourn normally, to find closure, to just say a proper goodbye. A quarter century. That's the heavy price Judge O'Keefe slammed on Paul Flores, 25 years to life, plus a permanent sex offender label. Staring him down right before dropping the gavel, she didn't hold back. For 25 years, you walked around free while Kristen's family burned in hell. She basically called him a lifelong, unrelenting predator. He had to be locked in a cage, entirely stripped of any chance to hunt women again. A literal cancer on society, that's what they called him. Come August 2023, they shipped him to Pleasant Valley State Prison. Didn't take long. Weeks later, another inmate absolutely blindsided him. Survived the hospital. Went right back. Then, in April 2024, he caught another blade directly in the middle of the prison yard. Now he's locked inside Corcoran State Prison, 0 confessions, and he still completely refuses to tell the Smart family where he hid Kristen. In January 2024, her family went after Cal Poly directly. The charge? A massive lawsuit alleging straight-up negligence and wrongful death. Their lawyer didn't mince words. The school absolutely could have stopped this murder. You can't just erase 25 straight years of psychological torture. But her parents are demanding a permanent system change. That legal war? It's still raging. Because here's the darkest twist, Kristen is still missing out there. And Sheriff Parkinson? He's sitting on one massive, entirely unfulfilled promise. He swore this investigation stays wide open until they bring her remains back. No breaks, no cold case boxes. They won't stop breathing down his neck. Just a 10-minute drive down the California coast from Cal Poly, the exact same campus, where she fought so desperately to build her future. You'll find a quiet spot in Pismo Beach. They call it Kristen's Point of Hope, a gorgeous overlook facing the open water she absolutely obsessed over. The exact waves she used to swim in. The breaks she would have surfed if someone hadn't stolen her timeline. Her family visits that bluff. Her old friends show up. Complete strangers stand there and mourn. 19. She was only 19. Every single email she wrote ended with this very specific quote. Live your life as an exclamation, not an explanation. She truly meant it. Changing up her hair color, testing out new nicknames, pushing through classes even when everything got brutal, and through it all, calling home every Sunday, 0 exceptions. She left this bizarre final voicemail about mysterious good news they still can't crack. Then she walked into that party alone, trusting the world wouldn't hurt her. Honestly, she really should have been right. Sure, the legal machine eventually churned out a guilty ruling, but a courtroom verdict isn't the whole truth. The real story, the exact spot where her bones are buried, the absolute closure her family craves is still buried somewhere out in the dark. Paul Flores knows. And every morning since May 25, 1996, he wakes up and chooses complete, psychopathic silence. She lived out loud, like a literal exclamation point. 26 agonizing years later, the entire world finally stopped to pay attention. Think about the father, Ruben. Considering the horrifying soil evidence under his deck, should he have walked away free? What if Chris Lambert just drove past that missing billboard? Would Paul Flores still be walking the streets today? Because remember, she's still out there missing. After all this absolute madness, do you think they'll ever actually find her? Drop your theories below, because Kristen's story isn't over yet. The more we keep rattling the cage and demanding real answers, the higher the odds that maybe, just maybe, her parents finally get to bring her home. The tragic fate of Nicole Amari Hall is a harrowing testament to the fact that the most monstrous betrayals often occur within the very walls meant to be a sanctuary. This case shatters the illusion that danger only lurks in the shadows of strangers, revealing that the ultimate evil can wear the mask of a guardian. It is a devastating reminder that children are the most vulnerable among us, requiring not just our love, but our fierce, unyielding protection against those who exploit their innocence. The core lesson we must learn is the vital importance of intuitive advocacy. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the subtle cries for help or the red flags hidden behind a flawless domestic facade. We must empower ourselves and our communities to question the unquestionable and to intervene when the safety of a child is at stake. Amari's story is a call to action to transform our collective grief into a commitment to child safety and systemic vigilance. We must ensure that our justice system and our neighborhoods leave no room for predators to hide behind sacred bonds. Let us honor Amari's stolen future by vowing to be the voice for those who cannot speak, ensuring that no other child's radiance is ever snuffed out by the hands of those they were taught to trust.